Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show.
The Tower of Dusk's team naturally had another intention, and that was to let the mages get as much training as possible. A battle at the level of the Titans and the Radiant Winged Giant Scorpion was not something that the mages could interfere with. If they accidentally got involved in the battle, they would all end up facing destruction. Hence, when an opponent at the level of the Radiant Giant Scorpion appeared, Lin Li naturally would not let go of this opportunity to train his subordinates. On the other hand, Lin Li said that he would guard against accidents, but he was actually taking the time to study the power of the Serpent of Light Shogger's incarnation in the debris of the stars. Holy Light. Lin Li not only treated the power as a trump card, but also hoped that he would be able to explore the secrets of the Divine Kingdom. Divine Kingdoms could only be possessed by gods, and although Lin Li's current strength seemed to be insufficient for him to create one yet, he thought of another use for the twin serpents of light and darkness after hearing Connor's description. If he could simulate the power of the twin serpents of light and darkness and apply it to his domain world, what kind of changes would there be in his domain world? Lin Li was not being delusional, rather, if it was someone else, he wouldn't have possibly realized that idea. However, Lin Li had the two pieces of the debris of the stars, Holy Light and Gloomy Dark, which contained the purest power of light and darkness, respectively. As long as Lin Li could comprehend a trace of the mystery from the power of the Serpent of Light Shogger, he could obtain massive gains. The battle with the giant Scorpion of Light was soon over, and be it the team of the Gilded Kingdom or the Tower of Dusk, there were no casualties in the battle. The Gilded Kingdom's team originally brought along with them various elites among legendary powerhouses, each of whom was very experienced in battles. Hence, they naturally wouldn't encounter any incidents during a battle of such a level. Although the rookie mages of the Tower of Dusk had only experienced very few battles, they gradually seemed less like rookies. Each of the battles that they had experienced involved the risk of losing their lives, and if they were careless, they would not only harm themselves, but also their companions. Such a battle was even more intense than when they were fighting in the barbarous arena in the Tower of Dusk. Various magical beasts appeared after they dealt with the giant Scorpion of Light along the way, perhaps because they had come out of the territory of the Radiant Winged Giant Python. However, they had a common feature. They all used the power of light. It was clearly because of the environment. Apart from the giant Scorpion of Light, there were also creatures like griffins and dragons, or even worms, all of which were radiant. However, just when the crowd thought that it would remain bright and radiant as it was, there were some abnormal changes in the desert that caught their attention. They discovered that a layer of black fog gradually shrouded the desert. There was also a black whirlwind that was continuously rotating in the middle of that black fog. In the beginning, Edmund and others were not very concerned, and were ready to lead the team to keep going in the original direction. However, after Lin Li saw the black fog, he suddenly had a flash of inspiration, and thought of the incarnation of Entoro, the Serpent of Darkness. The twin serpents of light and darkness were originally a pair, and the incarnation of the Serpent of Darkness had never appeared. Lin Li, who had been wanting to obtain the mystery of the twin serpents of light and darkness, had kept it in mind. On the one hand, he was worried that the incarnation of the Serpent of Darkness would suddenly appear and catch him off guard. After all, it was a powerful existence that was close to the level of the deities. On the other hand, he was afraid that the incarnation of the Serpent of Darkness had ceased to exist. If that had been the case, it would have probably been almost impossible to obtain it. After seeing the black fog in the distance, Lin Li immediately thought of the incarnation of the Serpent of Darkness he was looking for. In this environment, which was full of light, the Serpent of Darkness was probably the only one that could maintain such a special existence. This time, Lin Li did not scurry over, and instead informed Edmund that he would go over there to check it out. In fact, Lin Li was not being unreasonable, but since he was being cold and aloof, Lin Li naturally couldn't be bothered. After the battle with the Radiant Winged Giant Python, Edmund's attitude gradually changed, and Lin Li did not bother making things hard for them. Of course, there was a more important reason. Lin Li was still not sure if it was really the incarnation of the Serpent of Darkness in Toro. If the condition of the Serpent of Darkness was just like that of the Radiant Winged Giant Python previously, Lin Li would naturally need a few helpers. Before, Lin Li unearthed that temple, and as a result unearthed a secret that Edmund was clueless about. At this moment, Edmund naturally wouldn't miss what Lin Li wanted to find. As expected, after hearing that Lin Li was going over there to check out the situation, Edmund also immediately said he would tag along. However, Elder Zoomer and High Priest Poer stayed behind with the rest in order to avoid any unnecessary casualties to the group. Lin Li and Edmund soon arrived at the place that was shrouded in black fog, which was rather faint, and seemed to be about to dissipate at any time. However, Due to the fact that the surroundings were filled with light, it seemed more striking. Otherwise, the black fog would not attract anyone's attention in the world outside. The black tornado that was continuously rotating in the sparse black fog seemed to be more than 10 meters high, but the core part was only the height of an average human. Besides, the black tornado was also rotating very slowly, like an old man in debilitated health. As soon as Lin Li walked into the thin black fog, he felt an aura that was very similar in nature to the aura of the incarnation of the Serpent of Light. Almost without any suspense, Lin Li immediately confirmed that the black tornado was evolved by the incarnation of the Serpent of Light. Lin Li was puzzled at first because the ancient god of light had already destroyed the divine kingdom of the god of bravery. Why would it leave the incarnation of the Serpent of Light behind, then? However, there now seemed to be an answer to everything, and that was that the incarnation of the Serpent of Light had not escaped that disaster. However, with the ancient god of light being suppressed by the immortal king, the incarnation of the Serpent of Light had probably been reborn with the power of light that was emanating from the ancient god of light. On the other hand, the Serpent of Darkness was much unluckier as every inch of space was filled with the power of light, making it impossible for it to obtain enough dark force to be reborn. As a result, it was worn down by the power of light, and turned into the state that it currently was in. If Lin Li and the others had arrived a few decades later, the incarnation of the Serpent of Darkness might have gone up in smoke already. At that moment, Lin Li did not care to explain anything to Edmund, and simply took out the debris of the stars, Gloomy Dark, and tossed it into the center of the black tornado. As Gloomy Dark entered, the black tornado that was initially spinning slowly seemed to have regained its vitality as it suddenly sped up. However, the volume of the tornado seemed to be rapidly shrinking too. Seeing this scene, Edmund could already guess what Lin Li was doing without asking. Clearly, he was using some magical equipment to absorb that dark force. However, he was puzzled by the fact that the dark force was not actually that powerful. In fact, it was inferior to the power of the magic spells cast by a sanctuary powerhouse. So how was the dark force used here? However, Saint Edmund did not ask Lin Li any more questions despite being full of doubts. After all, even if the tension between them had eased up, it still wasn't to the point where they could chat about everything under the sun. If he didn't ask that question now, there wouldn't be any negative impact between them. If he couldn't even think of that, he wasn't worthy of being a saint. Soon, Lin Li put away Gloomy Dark, and used his mental strength to detect and capture the massive dark force. Indeed, that massive dark force was like an ant compared to an elephant when compared to the power of the Serpent of Light's incarnation. However, what he wanted was not a massive dark force. Even if there was only a wisp of power, it would be enough as long as it allowed him to have a glimpse of the mystery of the power of the Serpent of Darkness. After putting away Gloomy Dark, Lin Li smilingly said to Edmund, "It's just a massive dark force. I doubt it'll give us any useful information. Let's continue on our way." Since Lin Li stopped talking about the dark force, Edmund didn't ask anymore. Hence, he nodded, turned around, and returned to his team while Lin Li did so too. When Edmund returned to the Gilded Kingdom's team, Zoomer and Poer both immediately greeted him, and wanted to ask about the results of Edmund's examination, but they only saw Edmund shaking his head indifferently. After the two teams set off again, and walked for a short period of time, they soon saw 7 tall buildings with vague appearance in the desert in front of them. Before they could get a clear look of the building's appearance, Edmund already seemed extremely excited. Although Elder Zoomer and High Priest Poer did not know much about the matter, they immediately had an answer in their hearts when they saw Edmund's behavior. Immediately afterwards, under Edmund's order, the team of Gilded Kingdom immediately sped up, while the team of the Tower of Dusk also sped up once they saw the Gilded Kingdom doing so. Well, they naturally understood what the Gilded Kingdom was doing this for. However, Lin Li asked them to maintain their original speed, since they wouldn't lose track anyway. As they got closer and closer to their destination, the true appearance of the 7 tall buildings, which originally looked a bit hazy in the light, was gradually revealed. They were probably nearly 100 meters tall, with pointed tops and sleek bodies. They looked like a massive sword that was inverted and stuck into the ground. By the time they got closer, the crowd also finally realized that they were not magic towers, but 7 tall and majestic spiked monuments. These 7 monuments were emitting a faint golden light. The majestic aura was so domineering that many could not help but be reverent. The surface of the 7 monuments was inscribed with extremely complex mageths and numerous starry-like magic runes. Even in this environment that was full of light, they were still dazzling and eye-catching. The bottom of the monuments was also embellished with numerous magical crystals that should be providing mana for the monuments. Each magical crystal was probably in the sanctuary realm or above. On a side note, the 7 monuments were not lined up, but arranged in a circle. At the same time, there were powerful forces connecting the monuments together to form a massive mana barrier. Furthermore, they were surrounded by a bright ray of light that was like the sun. When the two teams reached the bottom of the monuments, and were only 1,000 steps away from the light in the middle, they finally saw the light above. There was also a sphere of light that was hovering in the air. At this juncture, Edmund could no longer suppress the excitement within him, as he raised his arms with enthusiasm, and exclaimed, "That's our holy artifact. As long as we bring it, we can revive Saint Aquilo." Hearing Edmund's words, all the people from the Gilded Kingdom immediately seemed to be full of zeal and ardor. If not for the fact that they still remembered where this place was, they would have probably cheered immediately. Even the mages of the Tower of Dusk, who were following behind, seemed to be rather agitated. Although the holy artifacts of the Lord had nothing to do with them, they seemed to be witnessing a miracle. Lin Li, Connorus, Angelano, and the two undead servants were the only ones who were indifferent to that. At that moment, Lin Li was instead even more vigilant, as he was ready to fight at any time. Usually, when it came to such junctures, one should not lower their guard. After suppressing the initial excitement in his heart, Edmund turned around and began to arrange for the crowd to prepare for the ceremony of the holy artifact harvest. The people of the Gilded Kingdom immediately got busy. Firstly, they built a temporary altar under the command of Elder Zoomer and High Priest Power. Although it was said to be a temporary altar, it was definitely not set up casually. The materials used to build the altar were all brought in from outside, and it was almost as if they had brought the Gilded Kingdom's treasure vault in. Each item was supreme grade magic material that was extremely valuable. There was no negligence during construction, and everyone was extremely serious. Even the slightest mistake would be corrected immediately. Thus, an exquisite altar was erected. The team of the Gilded Kingdom then surrounded the altar and lined up neatly around the altar like stars arching over the moon. At this juncture, Edmund was also holding his scepter while stepping onto the platform together with Zoomer and Power. They stopped when they were only one step away from the top. Edmund then continued to walk to the center of the altar. After coming to the center of the altar, Edmund first bowed and seemed to be secretly reciting something. Immediately afterwards, he raised his scepter high and chanted some incantation, which could also be called a curse. Despite seeing that the people of the Gilded Kingdom had already begun the ritual of collecting their holy artifact, Lin Li did not feel relaxed at all. When the people of the Gilded Kingdom were preparing for the ceremony, he had already carefully looked at the Magath on the monuments. However, despite being a guru of inscriptions, he still could not catch a glimpse of 1% of the mystery of the Magath. Lin Li had always been the most afraid of power that was beyond his control, but the people of the Gilded Kingdom had been progressing well, so he had no choice but to wait and see what happened. After all, he knew how important this matter was to those in the Gilded Kingdom, and if he interrupted at this juncture, they would probably fall out with each other. However, when Edmund began to chant the incantation, Lin Li suddenly felt his heart beating rapidly, while the suffocating sounds of murmuring once again rang in his ear. Besides, the murmuring this time seemed to have become clearer and penetrative, so much so that the desire within him almost could not be suppressed. Regarding the source of murmuring, Lin Li also finally determined that it was from the cluster of rays of light that was surrounded by the 7 monuments. Although Edmund did not state it clearly, Lin Li could guess that the light should have been the belief of the Illuminati. However, although the murmuring was making Lin Li displeased, it was only to this extent. Lin Li's mental strength was far beyond that of ordinary people. Besides, as the evil eye tyrant magical crystal was continuously strengthened, and the magical crystal of the Sky Castle was refined, his mental strength would reach an extremely exaggerated extent. A strong mental strength meant stronger and more solid willpower. Besides, the ancient god of light had been suppressed by the immortal king for thousands of years. Hence, it was almost impossible for it to try to influence Lin Li using the murmuring. Thus, although Lin Li had kept his guard high, he did not lead the team away immediately. At this juncture, the team of the Gilded Kingdom was carrying out the ritual in an orderly manner. Saint Edmund was holding his scepter high, while the incantation he chanted became more and more high-pitched. His body was trembling slightly too, and it was as if he had channeled all his power into this. Elder Zoomer and High Priest Power were standing nervously on the steps of the altar, gripping their scepters so tightly that their knuckles turned pale. Those below the altar were staring at the mysterious holy artifact, as if the ritual would be completed successfully as long as they kept their eyes glued to it. The large mass of light that represented the god of light, which was surrounded by 7 monuments with sharp tops, began pulsing more and more quickly. In the beginning, the beating would occur only about once every few minutes, but now it was as fast as the heartbeat of a person after a vigorous workout. The changes were the reason that the members of the Gilded Kingdom kept their guard up, fearing that they would release the ancient god of light by accident. However, the ancient god of light obviously would not be released so easily. When the frequency of pulsation was maximized, the 7 monuments surrounding it began to change, while the magical crystals in the 7 monuments began to light up. Immediately afterwards, mana flowed along the circuit and quickly traveled up the monuments, causing the mageths to flicker quickly while emitting a powerful might. At the same time, in the barrier formed by the 7 monuments, several rays of light began to blast at the ancient god of light, like bolts of lightning. Each ray of light that landed made the massive light of the ancient god of light slow down. It was just like a tamer using a whip to lash a misbehaving beast. At this point, the ceremony of the Gilded Kingdom had already reached a critical juncture, and a pillar of light came crashing down from the sky and onto the barrier. The barrier, which could suppress the ancient gods, did not hinder the pillar of light in the slightest, allowing it to shroud the holy artifact of the Illuminati that was hovering in midair. Under Edmund's constant summoning, the holy artifact of the Illuminati slowly flew towards the outside of the barrier along the pillar of light that descended from the sky, seemingly sensing the aura outside. The mass of light that the ancient god of light had evolved into immediately began to struggle again despite having just been dealt with. However, the 7 monuments were not kind to him at all. Countless rays of light immediately shot out from the void and twisted the mass of light continuously. Just like that, the ancient god of light was suppressed by the power of the 7 monuments, while the holy artifact of the Illuminati followed the pillars of light to approach the top of the barrier. Seeing this, the people of the Gilded Kingdom couldn't help but sigh in relief, be it Edmund, Zoomer, or others. As long as they could successfully obtain the holy artifact, it wouldn't be hard for them to resurrect Saint Aquilo. This time, the mission would be completed perfectly too. However, at this point, High Priest Power, who was waiting on the steps, suddenly dashed towards the altar. Elder Zoomer, who was waiting with Power, was momentarily confused by his actions, but he soon snapped back to his senses and tried to stop him. All of a sudden, he felt an unparalleled force that blasted him away. Elder Zoomer was a high-level sanctuary powerhouse, even if his abilities were below the sanctuary realm's peak, and he could not contend with peak sanctuary realm powerhouses. He wouldn't be blown away immediately. However, now that this unbelievable thing had happened, the person who attacked was High Priest Power, whose strength was the lowest among the sanctuary powerhouses present. While blasting Elder Zoomer away, he did not pause for a single moment, and he soon arrived in front of Saint Edmund. Immediately afterwards, he pointed his scepter forward, and a revolving sphere of light appeared. The power of the light almost turned into a massive light vortex that blasted towards Edmund. Under normal circumstances, given Edmund's strength, it would definitely not be enough to cause him the slightest hurt. However, things were now different. He had originally channeled most of his power into the ritual that he was presiding over. Hence, he didn't have spare capacity to defend and keep his guard up against others. At this moment, it was already the most critical point of the ritual, and it could not be disturbed at all. Faced with the sudden attack of High Priest Power, Edmund did not have any means to resist at all as he was simply blasted off the altar. This time, Edmund was severely injured. Due to the disruption of the ceremony, his mental strength faced a huge backlash, and he couldn't recover immediately. After blasting Edmund off the altar, High Priest Power took 2 steps forward and stood with his magic staff held high in his hand in the spot where Edmund was just now. They had initially already reached the final moment of the ritual, but High Priest Power simply replaced Edmund's mental strength with his own to take everything. At this moment, the people below the altar finally realized what was going on up there. However, apart from a group of people who immediately went over to check on Edmund's condition, no one else dared to rush up to the altar. One reason was that they knew that they were too incapable, and the other reason was that they could not understand what was going on. After all, for these people, Saint Edmund and High Priest Power were not to be provoked. Besides, they did not belong to the Illuminati in the first place, and most of them were from the Gilded Kingdom. Since they were direct subordinates of High Priest Power, they did not dare to act presumptuously. Elder Zoomer, who had been blasted away, was not that severely injured, so he immediately flew back to the altar and tried to strike at High Priest Power. However, he was still a step too late. Just as he was nearing the altar, the holy artifact in the barrier already flew out from the pillar of light and fell straight into the hands of High Priest Power. Power, what were you doing? Elder Zoomer exclaimed in disbelief. They had already defeated the Titan and the Radiant Winged Giant Python, but they were hampered by someone of their own team in the end. High Priest Power raised his hand to catch the flying holy artifact, and in the instant that he did, he was shrouded by the infinite light. A massive amount of mana emerged from the light like a tide, and the light that he was shrouded in condensed into a massive pair of radiant phantom wings immediately afterwards. There was faint divine power being exuded by it. High Priest Power had obviously grabbed the holy artifact, but he did not immediately respond to Elder Zoomer. Instead, the phantom-like wings behind him suddenly vibrated, and spread towards the surroundings like ripples. He then held the holy artifact high in the air and guffawed loudly. Power, are you out of your mind? Do you know what you're doing? Elder Zoomer had almost reached High Priest Power, but was swept away by the spatial ripples, and pushed backwards without any means to resist. At this juncture, Power seemed to have finally snapped out of his exhilaration as he proudly and disdainfully said, "Out of my mind? Of course not. I know exactly what I'm doing. I followed you guys all the way here precisely for this moment. Now it's time for me to harvest everything." "What are you talking about? Our mission is to resurrect Saint Aquilo. What are you doing this for?" Zoomer could not believe his ears at all, and even if he wanted to do that, it would be too terrifying. "What for? The Illuminati now belongs to the Gilded Kingdom. What do you take the Gilded Kingdom for? A tool or a slave? The kingdom wants to develop and expand to the mainland. What have you done? Not only did you refuse to contribute, you even tried to talk to the forces in the breezy plains about reaching a peaceful agreement. It's only a matter of time before the kingdom gets destroyed by you." High Priest Power seemed to have several years of resentment pent up within him, which he vented all at once. He even seemed to have broken into hysterics. High Priest Power's words immediately made Elder Zoomer infuriated. Without the Illuminati, the Gilded Kingdom would have never gained a foothold in the Endless Ocean, or developed to its current extent. During the Dark Age, there were High Elves on the mainland and the Sea Clan in the Endless Ocean. If not for the Illuminati, the Gilded Kingdom would have long been destroyed. "You're full of nonsense. In the history of the Gilded Kingdom, the Illuminati have blocked several invasions of powerful enemies of the kingdom, and resolved so many crises for you guys. Not to mention the siege of the marine beasts. Didn't the Illuminati pay a huge price to keep the High Elves and the Sea Clan out of the Gilded Kingdom when they launched invasions against you? As the High Priest, you couldn't have forgotten about that." Elder Zoomer wanted to go up and snatch the holy artifact from Power, but he knew that he was no match for the latter. Hence, he pinned his hopes on verbally arguing with him, in hopes that High Priest Power would regret and repent after hearing his words. However, after hearing Elder Zoomer's words, High Priest Power sneered and said, "Don't make yourself sound so noble. Do you think everyone is a fool?" Actually, everyone was well aware that once the High Elves or the Sea Clan had occupied the kingdom, the Illuminati would have lost their foothold. Anral has been ruled by the High Elves for so many years, and the humans weren't annihilated at all. Who said that the Gilded Kingdom would definitely be destroyed by the High Elves? You said that you were doing it for the kingdom, but you were doing it for yourselves. Elder Zoomer was rendered speechless by his words. No one could be sure about that. After all, since the matter hadn't happened yet, there were endless possibilities. Although the invaders would suppress the people and practice slavery, those were possibilities that everyone could think of as it could be considered common sense. However, if someone said that the High Elves would make the people of the Gilded Kingdom their guests after occupying the land, no one could say that that would definitely be impossible, because no one knew if the High Elves wouldn't act out of the ordinary. Of course, Elder Zoomer could say that with the strength of the Illuminati, they would still continue to exist even if the High Elves ruled over the Gilded Kingdom. However, he wasn't crazy after all, and wouldn't say such foolish things with a straight face. On the other hand, when High Priest Power saw that Elder Zoomer was speechless, he looked even more smug as he continued. "The Illuminati was originally established and developed with the support of the Gilded Kingdom. Yet, have you ever considered bringing about benefits for the Gilded Kingdom? You only ever think of your own interests. For the sake of your own interests, you made the Gilded Kingdom reach a peaceful agreement with those small forces of the breezy plains, and now you want to resurrect someone who died thousands of years ago. Shut up. Don't you know the reason why the kingdom chose to adopt the strategy of peaceful development in the breezy plains? The resurrection of Lord Aquilo is a private matter of the internal sector of the Illuminati, which is also supported by His Majesty. You've heard His Majesty issuing the decree himself, haven't you? You shouldn't be unaware of that." While arguing with High Priest Power, Elder Zoomer quietly paid attention to the situation on St. Edmund's side. He said so much to Power partly because he wanted to persuade him to stop, and also partly because he wanted to buy some time for Edmund to recover his strength. "Of course I know. Isn't it all because of him?" At this point in time, High Priest Power suddenly pointed a finger at Lin Li, who was standing far away. All of a sudden, he got extremely agitated, and he hollered in a resentful tone, "It's all because of him. You were afraid of him and that Ashen Warlock. You made the kingdom go against its usual practice, and signed some peace agreement with those lowly forces just because you were scared of suffering damage to your power. Even when he did something so terrible in the kingdom and destroyed the Fifth Fleet, you all pretended not to acknowledge it." Lin Li had been standing far away from them all this while. Despite the shocking changes that happened over at the side of the team of the Gilded Kingdom, he was still just observing. In his opinion, no matter what happened in the Gilded Kingdom, it was just an internal strife, and as long as they didn't provoke him for nothing, it would be unnecessary for him to get involved since he was just an outsider. However, when Lin Li saw that High Priest Power had suddenly pointed at him, he knew that he had to intervene, even though he didn't care much about this. Along the journey, he had long since noticed that High Priest Power would often stare at him hostilely. Hence, ever since High Priest Power got his hands on the holy artifact, Lin Li had already expected that this would happen. So when facing such a situation, he was not surprised at all, and instead continued watching the escalation of the conflict while pondering over the mageths of the 7 monuments. The mageths on the 7 monuments were even more complex than the void spirit mageths that he had encountered previously. Lin Li was certain that they were really masterpieces that were at the level of the divine smith level. Although there was a huge commotion going on the Gilded Kingdom's side, Lin Li was thinking about how to get the mageths on the 7 monuments and take them back. In his opinion, the mageths were the greatest treasure, and if he could understand some of them, it would be worth the trip. On the side of the team of the Gilded Kingdom, High Priest Power was still pointing at Lin Li while saying to Elder Zoomer, "When you were outside, you had so many excuses, and you refused to help the kingdom get rid of this obstacle. Now, you should have had the best opportunity to do it here, but you still chose to defend him. The kingdom is stuck at sea and unable to develop to the mainland because of people like you. Now that I have this holy artifact, I can be the one to lead the kingdom to infinite glory. Don't get up to any nonsense. His Majesty will not condone this. You'll bring the kingdom to destruction." Seeing that Edmund was slow to recover, Elder Zoomer became more and more anxious. While saying that, he waved his staff and tried to snatch the holy artifact back from Power. However, Power, who now had the holy artifact, had reached the peak of the sanctuary realm in strength, and even possessed a wisp of divine power. Hence, Elder Zoomer's approach was almost useless. Before Elder Zoomer could get close, Power waved the holy artifact in his hand, and a pillar of light struck at Elder Zoomer horizontally, making him vomit blood and get flung backwards. However, after blasting Elder Zoomer away again, High Priest Power did not take advantage of his victory and rushed to attack. Instead, the massive phantom-like wings on his back trembled, and he flew straight towards Lin Li. Even though he had wild thoughts of bringing the Gilded Kingdom to infinite glory, the first thing Power wanted to do was, of course, to deal with Lin Li and settle their scores. In the beginning, High Priest Power could pin his hopes on Edmund, and he had been trying to convince Edmund to attack Lin Li. However, his efforts were futile, and the result was very disappointing for him. In particular, after defeating the Radiant Winged Giant Python, he obviously felt that Edmund's attitude had changed. Hence, his hopes were diminished. However, now that Power had obtained the Illuminatus Holy Artifact, and his strength instantly reached the peak of the Sanctuary Realm, he was immediately confident about ending the feud with his individual abilities. Although the peak of the Sanctuary Realm was still within the Sanctuary Realm, but with that divine might, his strength was several times more powerful than that of the average Sanctuary powerhouse, who was at the peak of the realm. When facing a high-level Sanctuary powerhouse like Lin Li, the difference was obvious. However, looking at an approaching High Priest Power, the expression on Lin Li's face did not change, and he looked as indifferent and composed as before. In fact, he merely took a glance before turning to look at the 7 monuments instead. It was as if High Priest Power wasn't a Sanctuary powerhouse, who was at the peak of the realm. Upon sight of Lin Li's nonchalant reaction, High Priest Power was instantly enraged. In his opinion, Lin Li ought to seem intimidated and frightened even if he did not kneel down to beg for mercy immediately. However, Lin Li's reaction made him wonder if he was having an illusion that he had gained massive strength, but was actually the same as usual. "Fulick, drop the act. You're probably scared soulless now. You didn't expect me to be the winner, huh? Now, I will kill you, and soon your men will accompany you in hell too," High Priest Power said while stopping in midair. The phantom-like wings on his back were still flapping slightly, forming ripples in the space. As High Priest Power arrived, the unparalleled divine might immediately shrouded the Tower of Dusk's team too. Not to mention the mages of the Tower of Dusk. Even a powerhouse like Connorus could not stand it. Although Norfaler had already successfully stepped into the Sanctuary Realm and reached the middle stage thereof, he could not break free from the suppression of the divine might, either. The reactions of the people of the Tower of Dusk were quite within High Priest Power's expectations, although Lin Li's composure made him feel overwhelmed with anger that seemed to be on the verge of erupting like a volcano. The rest of the people of the Tower of Dusk gave him a lot of confidence. However, just as High Priest Power was admiring the looks of astonishment on their faces, Lin Li finally looked away from the 7 monuments and looked at him indifferently. "Why? Are you that confident that you think you'll be the final winner? Ha ha. Why? Aren't you going to continue pretending to ignore my strength? Don't think that no one can deal with you just because you have 2 peculiar magical weapons. Compared to the holy artifact that I'm holding now, Your magical weapons are just like trash. I've now detected the calling of the godhood, and I'm just one step away from becoming a deity that you can only look up to. Can your magical weapons do that? Your strength is inferior to mine, and your magical weapons are trash. What do you have to compare to me? If I'm not the final winner, do you think it would be you? A person who's about to die. High Priest Power hollered deliriously with arrogance while staring at Lin Li in a bid to see him getting frightened. However, to High Priest Power's disappointment, the expression on Lin Li's face did not change at all regardless of whether he was pretending or not. Lin Li was just standing casually while rubbing his nose. He suddenly smiled and said, "There's something I've been wanting to ask." When High Priest Power heard this, he thought that Lin Li was trying to beg for mercy without stooping low. Although he would not spare Lin Li, even if the latter knelt down and begged for mercy, he felt that it would be an immense pleasure to see his enemy in a horrible plight. Hence, he did not immediately attack, and instead sneeringly said, "Why? Do you want to ask what you can do to make me spare you? That's not impossible. If you kneel down now and make an oath to become my slave, I might let you live for a while longer." Making a sanctuary powerhouse take an oath and become someone's slave was akin to making one crawl under one's knees. High Priest Power's intention was purely to gain some benefits from Lin Li before taking revenge. In fact, it was clear that he wouldn't let Lin Li off regardless of what the latter said. Hearing the insults, Lin Li did not react much, but the people from the Tower of Dusk behind him were infuriated. Even Conorus, who had often resorted to whatever it took to achieve his goals, and even Angelano, who was not bound to Lin Li by a contract, were instantly enraged by High Priest Power's words. Despite the oppression of divine might, Conorus and the others, including the mages, immediately got into a stance and were ready to fight. As long as Lin Li issued an order, they would attack High Priest Power with all their might. However, Lin Li raised his hand and gestured for them to stop. He then raised his head and said to Power, "No, I know very well that the feud between us will never end unless someone dies, but I've been wondering if you ever get sick of hearing that fly buzzing around your ears all the time." Lin Li's words made everyone confused, but High Priest Power's expression changed drastically when he heard that. He exclaimed in shock, "What are you saying?" Lin Li laughed nonchalantly while reaching out to pull out his ears. He said, "It's nothing. I just feel really annoyed hearing a prisoner who has been imprisoned for thousands of years murmuring endlessly in my ears. So, I'm just trying to ask you if you have a solution to bear with the buzzing, or are you just as annoying as he is, so you two get along well?" "What? You can hear the whispers of God? How is that possible?" High Priest Power was flabbergasted as he lost his cool, and he was full of disbelief, as if he had heard something incredible. On the other hand, Saint Edmund of the Gilded Kingdom was just as astonished as Power. However, Edmund seemed a little gleeful, and he muttered, how could he hear God's whispers without getting tempted by it? The severely injured Elder Zoomer was being carried to Edmund by his subordinates. He was very hopeless about the situation initially, but after hearing about the muttering, he couldn't help but ask in bewilderment, "Saint Edmund, what's about this God's whispers?" Although the ancient god of light was suppressed and slipped into deep slumber, his instincts are constantly summoning everyone who managed to enter this place and tempting those who can hear him. When Power did such a thing, I suspected that it could be because of the god's whispers, but of course, the biggest reason is his heart's desires, Edmund said while looking at Lin Li and Power as he revealed the truth. He seemed to be blaming himself for his own lack of good judgment. Hearing Edmund's words, Elder Zoomer, however, was still a little confused as he said with a frown, "In that case, since Fulik also heard God's whispers, wouldn't the situation be even more unfavorable for us? Power is causing enough trouble for us, and if Fulik acts like him too, the ancient god of light might really be released." However, Edmund shook his head and looked over with some hope in his eyes as he said, "No, the fact that Fulik can say that means that he hasn't been tempted by the god's whispers. How strong must his willpower be that he can resist the temptation of God's whispers? We might need to count on him to overcome the crisis this time." Despite the fact that Edmund made it sound as if there was plenty of hope, Elder Zoomer couldn't bring himself to relax at all. After all, apart from the temptation of the so-called God's whispers, there was a real and substantial difference in strength between Lin Li and Power, which the temptation of God's whispers could close. So what if Lin Li did not get tempted by the God's whispers? One was a high-level sanctuary powerhouse, while the other was at the peak of the sanctuary realm. The two could not be compared to each other at all. Although High Priest Power was surprised that Lin Li could also hear the God's whispers, the thoughts he had after recovering from the shock were exactly what Elder Zoomer feared. Even if the other party could hear the God's whispers, what did that mean? He was truly at the peak of the sanctuary realm, and there was nothing Lin Li could do. Thinking of this, the astonishment on High Priest Power's face immediately vanished, and he resentfully said with menace, "Quit getting up to such tricks. Even if you've heard him, So what? Do you really think I'll spare you on the account of this? This time, no one can save you. After I kill you, the Gilded Kingdom will become the new ruler of the breezy plains under my lead. After saying his piece, High Priest Power waved the holy artifact in his hand forward, and a huge ray of light blasted towards Lin Li and the others. Not giving Lin Li a chance to speak at all, the light slash was several hundred meters long, resembling a crescent. Not only did it target Lin Li, it even aimed for the other members of the Tower of Dusk who were within the range of attack. At this point, Lin Li finally saw clearly what the holy artifact that High Priest Power was holding. It looked just like a fist-sized gemstone, or rather a large diamond, that was embellished in aquamarine metal. It looked like the pendant from a necklace, and the reason that its appearance was blurry was because the large diamond was emitting a dazzling ray of light that was as bright as the sun. If not for the fact that High Priest Power was using the power of the holy artifact at close range, and allowed the light to dim momentarily, he would look like he was holding a sphere of light in his hand. In the face of High Priest Power's attack, Lin Li's expression remained calm, but deep down, there was no trace of negligence and carelessness at all. After countless battles spent honing his skills, Lin Li had long gotten rid of that mentality. Seeing that ray of light slash shoot over, Lin Li waved the Helios scepter in his hand, and the light and darkness sword immediately appeared in front of him while the crescent-shaped light slashed over. The attacks from both sides were incredibly terrifying, and in an instant, it was as if heaven and earth had collided. Amidst the deafening roar, the aftershocks of the collision instantly swept out in all directions, shaking the ground into even smaller particles of yellow sand. Next, a huge crater that was more than 10 meters deep was formed. Once they saw this scene, the people behind Lin Li immediately understood that such a level of combat was simply too intense for them to participate in. Hence, after catching Lin Li's hint, Connorus and the two undead servants immediately retreated from the battlefield while protecting the mages of the Tower of Dusk. Watching the people of the Tower of Dusk retreat, High Priest Power did not attack them, and instead looked at Lin Li with a sinister smile. He then said, "Okay then, I'll let them live for one more moment. Once I kill you, I'll let them accompany you soon." As soon as High Priest Power finished speaking, he suddenly felt a piercing chilliness rising up from behind him, but he didn't turn around to look, and instead he retracted the large pair of phantom-like wings on his back, just like a bird retracting its wings. They formed a massive light shield, and there was a massive boom immediately afterwards as a light and darkness sword darted out from the void and slashed at the light shield. Although High Priest Power was blasted by the massive blow, and his body was swaying, he apparently did not suffer any damage. After stabilizing his body, he even laughed triumphantly, and pointed his staff at Lin Li before hollering, "How can you harm me with an attack of such a low level? Don't you understand? Any resistance from you will be in vain." However, Lin Li was not the type who liked talking nonsense while fighting. Although the sneak attack did not work, he was not in the least bit discouraged, and when his body flashed, dozens of light and darkness swords surfaced. With the swing of the Helios scepter, he rotated like a windmill towards High Priest Power. Moreover, after the dozens of light and darkness swords were released, Lin Li did not stop there, and instead continued to raise the Helios scepter high while continuously chanting an incantation. As the chanting proceeded, a massive ball of lightning, that was like a shooting star in the void, began darting towards High Priest Power like a thunderbolt. Although High Priest Power's abilities had been increased to the peak of the Sanctuary Realm, he was still far from being able to compare with Lin Li in terms of combat. He was the High Priest of a kingdom, and he would naturally have his subordinates handle most matters. It would not be wrong to say that he was living in luxury. There was no need for him to engage in a battle personally at all. However, Lin Li was different. Not only had he experienced several adventures, the experience he had gained in countless battles was definitely not what ordinary people could compare to. Hence, High Priest Power might be powerful, but he was obviously not strong enough to suppress Lin Li. If High Priest Power really ascended to godhood, his powerful divine might could make Lin Li immobile. However, he was only at the peak of the Sanctuary Realm, and no matter how close he was to the Divine Realm, he was still not there yet. High Priest Power was like a bull with massive power, while Lin Li was like a swift and agile cheetah. Even if a bull had the power to knock mountains down, it would be akin to being powerless if he couldn't strike the cheetah. Sooner or later, the cheetah would find an opening and kill it. High Priest Power coped with Lin Li's attacks in a disheveled manner. Although he did not suffer much injury, he could not keep up the smugness any longer. He just said that he could easily get rid of Lin Li, but he was now in such a pathetic state. Power's power was increased by force, and he doesn't have enough corresponding combat experience. Whoever's going to win the battle is not confirmed yet. Although Edmund was injured and lost the power to fight, his vision was not affected. As for Elder Zoomer and the rest of the Gilded Kingdom, they finally felt less worried even though they could not follow the battle as clearly as Edmund did. However, deep down, they still didn't think that High Priest power would be defeated. After all, the pressure of the peak sanctuary realm power was too much. They just hoped that Lin Li would expend Power's power before Edmund recovered. However, it would be more realistic to hope that they would both end up in a terrible state. The team of the Tower of Dusk was also nervously paying attention to the battle in the sky. Norfaller had a few impulsive urges to rush up to help, but was dissuaded by Connorus. Although Norfaller had already reached the sanctuary realm and reached the mid-stage, his strength was really insufficient. If he went forth, he would only be creating more trouble for Lin Li. At this juncture, the battle in the sky had already entered the cooldown stage, even though it had only started a short while ago. Besides, the strength of Lin Li and High Priest Power's behavior seemed to have been reversed. Lin Li was completely suppressing High Priest Power, who was obviously stronger, beating him up into a pulp. Of course, the holy artifact in the hands of High Priest Power was definitely not a lousy good, since it could become the holy artifact of the Illuminati. With the help of the power of this holy artifact, High Priest Power did not suffer any substantial damage even though Lin Li had dealt him a great blow. The light and darkness swords and powerful sanctuary level attack spells were all useless in the face of the defense created by the power of that holy artifact. However, although he did not suffer any substantial damage, High Priest Power was feeling terrible. He was full of confidence about killing Lin Li and subduing the Illuminati to bring the Gilded Kingdom to infinite glory just now. However, he couldn't even deal with Lin Li, let alone achieve the rest of his goals. Besides, there were still the 3 arbitrators of the Supreme Council to deal with in Anral. At the thought of this, High Priest Power felt a burning sensation on his face, as if everyone below was mocking him. He waved the holy artifact, and thousands of rays of light were emitted at once, forcing Lin Li to retreat far. Immediately afterwards, he raised his arms high and fully activated the power of the holy artifact. Under High Priest Power's pushing, the holy artifact of the Illuminati and the large diamond on it started emitting a light that got increasingly intense. It was no longer a glowing light, but an existence that was like a white hole. The power became increasingly terrifying, while the divine might was more and more intense. It erupted from the white hole. When High Priest Power was trying to activate the power of the holy artifact, without hesitation and suppressing the 7 monuments of the ancient god of light, he seemed to have felt a call as he maximized the power. Power was holding the holy artifact, and under the light, there were shocking changes to his body. His hair, skin, and bones seemed to have turned into crystals of light, just like with the previous winged angels. However, his power was several times larger. With the changes to his body, High Priest Power's strength also began increasing rapidly. The peak of the sanctuary realm was already the limit in the first place, and there was little room for further improvement. However, High Priest Power's strength continued to increase, while his body also emitted a hidden divine might. The divine might was no longer provided by the holy artifact, but rather was generated by Power. That just meant that his strength had approached, or even reached the so-called demigod realm. At the same time, High Priest Power's expression changed rapidly, and he no longer looked as sinister and resentful as he used to. Instead, he had a peaceful expression. In fact, he seemed emotionless. Of course, despite the lack of expression on his face, his eyes were still fixed on Lin Li. He obviously still regarded Lin Li as the most important opponent at the moment. Seeing the changes that had occurred in High Priest Power's body, Edmund's face instantly turned pale, and he murmured, how is that possible? How did his strength rise to the level of a demigod? What? Demigod? Elder Zoomer, who was at the side, initially also just felt that High Priest Power's strength had become greater, but he was so shell-shocked when he heard Edmund's words that he turned pale. The demigod realm was said to be the peak of the sanctuary realm, but also a transcendence from the sanctuary realm. That was the realm that was truly the closest to the divine realm. A demigod was one who was only half a step away from becoming a god and a true deity. It could not be reached purely through accumulation of power. One had to comprehend the various laws, or find their own path to godhood. That was precisely the reason that Saint Edmund was so surprised, because he didn't believe that a single object would allow one to become a demigod. When Lin Li, who was fighting with High Priest Power, noticed the changes to the latter's body, his expression finally became much more sullen. Lin Li had met a powerhouse who had become a demigod once in the Great Rift of the Eternal Darkness Altar. It was the flame dragon Lothar. Fortunately, it had just woken up from a long slumber then, and Lin Li had the branch of the Tree of Eternity, as well as the Seed of Eternity. Only then did he manage to have a close shave with death while making the almost invincible flame dragon Lothar go back to sleep in the fire element plane. However, Lin Li did not think that he could use the same method, because he had to face a powerhouse that was a demigod without the help of powerful sanctuary powerhouses like Rog and Nifa this time. After High Priest Power maximized the power of the holy artifact, he was now half a step from the divine level, and seemed to become a different person. It could also be said that he was not a person anymore. His whole body crystallized, and his hair turned snow white. He was like a crystal statue that radiated light from the core. As Power's mana accumulated to its threshold, the artifact in his hand suddenly flew from his hands and circled around him like a satellite. His arms were stretched out to both sides, and crystal-like flames emerged from his palm, burning the expensive magic staff in his other hand to ashes. Power's arms were spread open, and the crystal-like flames continued to hover above his palms. The artifact continued to circle around him, and the phantom-like wings behind him slowly flat. He emitted an extremely dangerous aura that caused everyone below to feel oppressed and breathless. The saint from Illuminati, Edmund, looked really stupefied when he saw Power's transformation. Fear could be seen in his eyes. How could the ancient god of light come out of his seal? Gasped Edmund. Edmund's exclamation changed Elder Zoomer's expression. Saint, what are you saying? Isn't the ancient god suppressed in the seal? He asked. Both of the men directed their gazes to the center of the 7 monuments. They saw the ball of light floating within the shield calmly. It looked as though it had just gone back to sleep. Despite the transformation, Edmund and Zoomer felt a strong sense of unease. When the high priest Power was at the peak of the sanctuary realm, they could still see a strand of hope that Lin Li could defeat him, even though he was less powerful than Power. Now that Power had risen to the stage where he was half a step from the divine level, they were convinced that the high priest was not what common sanctuary powerhouses could handle. Even if Lin Li had rich, battling experience, he would never be able to make up such a huge gap in power. Edmund and Zoomer were not the only ones worrying about this. Lin Li thought of the Darn issue as well. Although he had learned a lot from Garesco, and had definitely mastered the ability to battle across levels, there was still a limit to the number of levels. What did it mean for someone to be half a step from being a divine? It suggested that although one had yet to ascend to the seat of a divinity, he had definitely left the sanctuary realm, and could be considered as a semi-divinity. While Lin Li had confidence in his own ability, he absolutely did not have the ego to believe that he had the ability to confront a semi-divine. It wouldn't be an understatement to say that the difference in their abilities was as huge as the distance between heaven and earth. But, despite the awareness of the power gap he had with Power, Lin Li was not panicking. Instead, he was calmer than before because he knew very well that panicking was useless at a time like this, and could only put him to death even faster. Moreover, Lin Li was extremely clear that there could only be one winner between himself and the high priest. Since Power was determined to get rid of Lin Li, the only choice the latter had was to fight for himself. Power did not speak as many futile words as before. He moved his hands and transformed the 2 crystal-like flames into 2 long crystal swords that emitted white flames. Immediately after, Power disappeared from his location and reappeared in front of Lin Li. He pointed one of the crystal swords at Lin Li's heart and the other horizontally towards his neck. It was enough to give any sanctuary powerhouse an instant death. His movement did not make use of the law of space. The speed of his movement was based on pure power that was comparable to the speed of light. Despite expecting the speedy attack, Lin Li was still caught off guard. It was lucky for him to have his defensive spells ready on his body. The spells were triggered when the attack arrived. Lin Li reacted by sending a ring of fire from his body into the surrounding space. This was a common spell used by magicians to prevent enemies from giving close-up attacks. Although the level of the resistance ring of fire was not high, and it could be used by any archmage, its effect was different when it was cast by a sanctuary powerhouse like Lin Li. The flames had a golden glow, and encompassed Lin Li's knowledge of the debris of the star's raging flames. It definitely also displayed the strength of a sanctuary powerhouse in optimizing the laws of magic. If this ring of resistance was set against ordinary sanctuary powerhouses, the terrifying force would create a headache for its opponent. However, Lin Li's opponent was not any common sanctuary powerhouse. He was one that had already surpassed the sanctuary level, and was half a step from becoming a divinity. The effect of the ring of fire could only be discounted before Power. The high priest did not even look at the ring of fire. The 2 long crystal swords remained in his hands as he allowed the fire to rush towards him. As the fire came into contact with his body, it was extinguished almost instantaneously as though it was a spark of fire under a crazy wind. Of course, this was not the only defensive spell that Lin Li covered his body with. Just when he triggered the ring of resistance, he held a massive ice shield before him and cast all kinds of defensive spells around himself. However, Lin Li knew that his defenses could only work against common powerhouses in the sanctuary realm. He could only use them to buy time before an opponent who was half a step from becoming a divine. The time he could buy was not substantial, either, at most a tenth of a second. An average person might not be able to do anything within a tenth of a second. However, it was enough time for Lin Li to trigger the powers from his space robe. Just when Power's swords broke the different layers of defense and were about to reach Lin Li's body, Lin Li's space robe glowed and only left his afterimage behind. The afterimage vanished when the swords pierced through it. The high priest would have cussed if he had been the usual Power, but it seemed that he did not mind this failure. He only waved his swords and drew a flaming cross in the air. The direction the flaming cross came right at Lin Li, who just reappeared in the void. This time, he was prepared for the attack. His Helios scepter glowed, and he waved a light and darkness sword at the flaming cross. However, Lin Li did not stop to look at the results afterward. He activated his space robe and reappeared in another location. The reality showed that he had certainly made the right choice. Just when the formidable light and darkness sword came into contact with the flaming cross, the sword dissipated in the blink of an eye. The flaming cross was not affected at all. It shot along its original trajectory and shattered the space with its flames. After avoiding the flaming cross, Lin Li immediately called out his strongest defenses, the world domain. At this point, Lin Li was not thinking about retaliation at all. Doing so would only be equivalent to an ant attempting to shake a tree. He might not even injure Power if he used the world sword. Power appeared behind Lin Li right after the latter displayed his domain world. The former waved his crystal swords at the domain world, and it resulted in something that was more terrifying than Lin Li's world sword. It created countless cracks in Lin Li's domain world as if it was made of glass. Fortunately, Lin Li had already integrated the 7 pieces of the debris of stars into the domain world before this. The debris formidable powers helped to protect the domain world from being destroyed by the swords within a single blow. However, the immense impact from Power's sword flung Lin Li straight to the ground like a ball. Palm. A sound of explosion erupted as a huge sand pit appeared on the ground. It was as if a meteor had hit the ground. However, it did not stop Power. After he bashed Lin Li to the ground, he dashed after him like a flash of lightning, diving into the sandpit. Shortly after the high priest entered the sandpit, a thunderous sound roared from the sandpit and its surrounding ground. What followed was streaks of light that spewed out of the ground. They brought a figure into the sky, and the figure was none other than Lin Li, whom Power had sent into the ground earlier on. At this moment, Lin Li was certainly in a daze. Seeing that Power's movements were not at all hindered below the sand made Lin Li feel as if he was ambushed by thousands and millions of people. The attacks were all-encompassing and had almost no loopholes. The terrible thing was how each and every attack was filled with immense force. The effects of subsequent attacks were not at all hindered by the number of spells that were cast. Every attack created huge damage to Lin Li's domain world, and it could have been destroyed if not for the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Because of the time needed to repair the damage, Lin Li did not have a chance to use his space robe before he was flung out from the ground. Although the domain world had not yet been destroyed, Lin Li's condition was not ideal. As the domain world was closely related to its creator, mana was not its only concern. Mental strength and soul were involved as well. If Lin Li had been replaced by Edmund or other sanctuary powerhouses, they would have lost it after their domain world got damaged. When Edmund and the rest witnessed Lin Li falling from the sky and being blasted back up, their hearts sank to rock bottom. It was very obvious that Lin Li's rich combat experience was useless before the high priest, who was half a step from being a divine. The former could only allow himself to be beaten from the start to the end. Although Lin Li had not yet been killed by Power, Edmund and the others saw no hope for him. It seemed like it was only a matter of time before it happened. None of them could think of any possibility for Lin Li to turn the tables. Similarly, the people from the Tower of Dusk were incredibly anxious as well. Not to mention Connorus. The rookie mages from the team could also tell that Power had gained the upper hand, but they also knew that their anxiety was of no use. This was not a battle they had the ability to participate in. Lin Li, however, felt no such sense of disparity. He had not given up. While the power disparity made the situation seem bleak to the rest of the people, Lin Li knew that he would only lose all hope if he were to give up at this juncture. Lin Li's mind was raging with strategies as he confronted the high priest. He was trying to think of a way to counter Power's attacks. Of course, instead of a confrontation, it was more accurate to say that he was trying his best to bear Power's beating. He knew that he would be doomed if he were to abandon his resistance against those attacks. Lin Li definitely had a lot of powerful trump cards, which included the Lord of Nightmares and the Lord Devourer, that were sealed in his summoning lamp, as well as Xiao Hua, that was living in his dream garden ring. It was they who gave Lin Li the confidence to agree to Edmund's invitation to continue this exploration. However, he knew that these trump cards would only be effective at the sanctuary realm. If he were to have a conflict with the Gilded Kingdom, These cards would definitely help the Tower of Dusk gain the upper hand. These trump cards would not suffice when his opponent was half a step from becoming a divine. The power of Lord Devourer was definitely freakish, as it could convert any material or force into his own energy, but a powerhouse who was half a step from the divine level already had a strand of divine energy in his body. It was something that Lord Devourer had no ability to digest. If Lord Devourer were to ingest Power's powers in any amount, he would surely become bloated. As for Elemental Dragon Xiaohua that possessed unlimited mana, he definitely could be referred to as the king of team attacks, but since he had yet to enter the Sanctuary realm, he was even further distanced from the divine realm. The disparity in power was not something he could bridge. While the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were powerful items, their powers could not be optimized by Lin Li's present abilities against a demigod. When Immortal King defeated the Dragon of Destruction with the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, he complemented the debris with the Stars of Fury to maximize their effects. However, Lin Li only had a replica of the reincarnation crossbow. It was not enough for him to maximize the impact of the debris of the stars. Similar to how High Priest Power was not comparable to the Dragon of Destruction, Lin Li was not comparable to the Immortal King, either. Immortal King was a freak who could directly suppress the ancient god of light, while Lin Li was only a high-ranking powerhouse in the Sanctuary realm. Lin Li could not help but sigh at this thought. Although he had many trump cards, there was none that could help turn the tables against Power. Just when he was wondering if this would be his downfall, he caught a glimpse of the 7 monuments. A thought, or a sense of hope, flashed across him. The clash with the High Priest helped Lin Li to gain a better sense of the latter's abilities. He could detect 3 forms of energy running in his body. Apart from his original energy, there was also the energy from the holy artifact, and that from the power of light. Power was a middle-ranked sanctuary powerhouse. The acquisition of the holy artifact raised his abilities to the peak of the realm. It was the invincible power of light that turned him into a demigod. Lin Li could also feel the strong resemblance the power of light had to the abilities of the ancient god of light. In reality, Lin Li had been suspecting that the ancient god of light had a part to play in helping Power ascend to the status of a demigod. If not, it would be utterly absurd for a holy artifact, or rather magical equipment, to turn someone into a demigod. From how the ancient god of light used the god's whispers earlier, it suggested to Lin Li that although the ancient god of light was suppressed, it definitely had influence over this space. Lin Li reasoned that he would have to deal with this energy to defeat Power. He was confident in getting rid of Power as long as he could get this energy out of the latter's body. When Lin Li was still feeling worried about how he could do that, he thought of the 7 monuments. These 7 monuments had been built by the Immortal King to suppress the ancient god of light. They had to have incredible resistance against him. Therefore, Lin Li believed that if he could discover the secrets in those monuments, he might be able to reverse the tide. Of course, it was not an easy job. Although he was an inscription master, the mageths on those monuments were at the divine level. Frankly speaking, uncovering the secrets of divine level mageths would be as challenging as battling a demigod. If Lin Li had a quiet and stable environment to study the monuments in peace, there was a possibility of him understanding the mysteries within those mageths. However, the problem now was the need for Lin Li to multitask in resisting Power's attacks and repairing the domain world. How would he have the luxury to concentrate on studying the mageths? Yet, this was the only thing Lin Li knew that could help him to turn things around. While he did not have many discoveries, when he was studying the Void Spirit Mageth in the past, he had gotten some knowledge of how a divine level Mageth might function. While Lin Li was not certain that he could make new discoveries to turn the tables, Lin Li was not someone who would give up easily. But a problem he faced was whether he could buy enough time to study the Mageths on the monuments. It was obviously impossible to count on the men below for help. Even if Edmund had not been injured, the combined abilities from both teams would not have sufficed against the High Priest. Hence, Lin Li knew he could only rely on himself. The stress, however, was real. Lin Li continued to patch up his domain world and dedicated careful attention to study the mageths on the monuments. However, he had to redirect all this attention to repair the domain world that suffered great damage from Power. Not to mention that he wanted to study a divine level mageth. Lin Li realized that the tightness of time would not allow him to read direct texts. After a few tries, Lin Li grew anxious as well. Then, he suddenly thought of the force that was bound by the debris of the stars, holy light. When he killed the incarnation of the Serpent of Light, Lin Li employed the holy light to engulf a huge portion of its mana when he was killing the serpent. Although it was not all of its mana, it was as powerful as the suicide attack a sanctuary powerhouse could launch on his enemies if he were to release all of that mana at once. Lin Li, however, had not used this strategy, as he knew that its impact was not enough to hurt the demigod. But now, What he needed was not to bring great harm to Power. What he needed was a few minutes. If he could not uncover any secret of the divine level Magaths within this time frame, it would not matter even if he were to have 10 or 100 more times of the duration. Suddenly, a thought appeared in Lin Li's mind, and he extracted one of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, holy light, from his domain world. This immediately caused the power of the domain world to reduce by a level. It seemed like Power's power of light was going to rush into his domain world as well. But this time, Lin Li was not in a hurry to repair the damage made by Power. He turned holy light into an arrow and positioned it on the reincarnation crossbow. As the arrow flew from the crossbow, the energy from the serpent of light erupted. Of course, the high priest did not let such an amount of force concern him. He did not even care to dodge the attack. Although the attack could badly injure a powerhouse in the sanctuary realm, it would not threaten a demigod like him. The power of the serpent of light came from the power of light in this space, which came from the ancient god of light. It could be said that both of the energy types originated from the same source. Hence, when Power sensed that the energy from the arrow was the same as the power of light he manifested, he thought that it was like a supplement rather than a threat. However, when that force hit Power, something unbelievable happened. While the arrow carried the power of light, it also embodied the will of the serpent. Although it was not a strong force, it was like a virus that clashed with the energy within Power. The energy from the ancient god of light instinctively saw it as an intruder, and started to direct its attention to dispelling the serpent's will. Of course, it would not take more than a minute for the demigod to dispel the serpent's will. How would this period of time be of any use to Lin Li? The mystery within a divine level Magath was not something that could be understood within a minute. Even if Lin Li were to be a divine smith, it would be impossible for him to figure out a divine level Magath that he had yet to see before. But Lin Li's 1 minute was not equivalent to that of common men. Just when the will of the incarnated serpent took its effect on Power, Lin Li cast a readied spell with his Helios scepter. This spell transformed Lin Li's domain world drastically. The time within the entire domain world started to speed by. A second outside the domain world was equivalent to a few days in it, and a minute outside was dozens of days inside. Lin Li had just distorted time. Of all the laws of time and space were the most difficult to understand and master, even for divines. Fortunately, the possession of the Book of Eternity, as well as debris of the star's nothingness, gave Lin Li the chance to take a glimpse of the secrets of space and time. It was a piece of the debris of the stars that was left behind by the god of mages, Garesco. What Lin Li was doing now was to use his understanding of time to distort the time inside his domain world. With that, a minute outside became equivalent to 12 days inside his world. Of course, doing so was not without a cost. Lin Li's mental strength and life force started to deplete significantly with the passing of every second. This was a precarious situation that Lin Li would never dare to waste any minute or second. He devoted all of his focus to study the Magath that was on the monuments. While a dozen of days seemed like a long time, the time was really tight for anyone to use it to study divine level Magaths. Not to mention a thorough study, the challenge was real for one to even uncover a trace of their mystery. To the rest of the men below, Lin Li's arrow had not the slightest impact on Power's body. The glow on his body recovered after a few flashes. They saw the high priest continue his attacks by waving his crystal swords towards Lin Li's domain world. While it took Power nearly a minute to recover, none of them could see the impact this minute had on the entire situation. What people saw was the domain world on the verge of collapse due to Power's attacks, and Lin Li's passiveness towards it. Unlike before, he had stopped being active in repairing the domain world. Lin Li's performance brought Edmund and the rest absolute despair. To everyone else, Lin Li had already given up on resisting. Although they knew that Lin Li's continued resistance would only delay their defeat, it was something that gave them a speck of hope. Now, this speck of hope was nowhere to be found. Edmund was full of regret at this moment. If he had seen through Power's ambitions, he would definitely not have brought him here. Now, it was too late for regret. He knew that there would only be catastrophe for the Illuminati and Gilded Kingdom once the demigod left this place. They watched as Lin Li's domain world collapsed under the thunderous attacks launched by High Priest Power. They knew that the collapse of Lin Li's domain world would mean that their doomsday had arrived. Yet, none of them had any idea on how to overcome this. Seeing this, a smile flashed across Power's expressionless face. His one and only obsession was to slaughter Lin Li by his hand. When his goal was about to turn into reality, he finally let himself transform into the servant of the ancient god of light. As a series of explosions thundered across the space, Lin Li's battered domain world finally collapsed under Power's attacks. It shattered like glass hit by a metal hammer under the eyes of all the despairing men. High Priest Power did not cease his attacks after he destroyed Lin Li's domain world. He waved his crystal swords to weave an enormous net, and cast it at Lin Li. Without the protection of his domain world, what awaited the high-ranking sanctuary powerhouse was only doom. The sight of this scene shattered all of everyone's hopes. Edmund and the rest closed their eyes in despair, while the people from the Tower of Dusk rushed towards Lin Li. While it was futile, they really hoped to help shelter Lin Li from that critical blow. Suddenly, Lin Li opened his eyes. Although the domain world had shattered, and he was faced with Power's inevitable attack, there was no trace of panic on Lin Li's face. He raised the Helios scepter and recited a spell speedily. As he did that, the gem sitting on top of the scepter radiated dazzlingly. However, the light from the Helios scepter was not directed at High Priest Power. Instead, it went past him and down to the 7 monuments below. Although the monuments were a great distance away from Lin Li, it reached the monuments almost instantaneously. The light activated the Magath on the 7 monuments. If one were to pay attention to them, they would discover that the movement of the mana within the Magath was slightly different than before. Moreover, the power of the 7 monuments was originally used on the shield to suppress the ancient god of light. Now, it was spreading outwards and attracting the power of light towards it. The net cast by High Priest Power was about to reach Lin Li when the transformation started to happen on the 7 monuments. However, the glow of the net dimmed rapidly at the critical moment. Then, it suddenly disappeared when it was about to come into contact with Lin Li. The sight of the High Priest's astonishment brought a smirk to Lin Li's face. Although he looked extremely worn out, he continued to activate the powers of the Magath. Who cares if you are a servant of the divine, or the will of the ancient god? I will show you where you belong, said Lin Li calmly. Shortly, the men saw Power's phantom-like wings being tugged by an invisible but massive force. The wings started to distort very quickly. The distortion started from the edges. The wings disintegrated into minute particles, and were sucked into the shield that was held up by the 7 monuments, forming a magnificent glow along their trajectory. After the phantom-like wings vanished, Power's body started to disintegrate as well. His silver hair and crystal-like body were like weathered stones, decomposing by layers. Very quickly, Power's body disappeared from the sky, and the holy artifact from Illuminati flew directly into Lin Li's hands. The ball of light within the shield of the 7 monuments started to vibrate vigorously again, but not for long. The monuments cast 1,000 rays of light on the ball, and calmed it down. It was only now that Lin Li knew he could afford to be more relaxed. He sighed in relief, and descended with the holy artifact in his hand. While it seemed like only close to a minute had passed, this minute had been filled with too much pressure and anxiety for Lin Li. It was not easy for Lin Li to distort time with his present abilities. Apart from consuming a huge amount of mental strength and life force, he had to take a tremendous risk. Why then did he activate the Magath from the monuments against Power only when his domain world collapsed? It was not because he took all the time to understand the divine level Magath. Instead, it was because he was trapped within the laws of distorted time, and nearly lost himself in it. It was the collapse of the domain world that broke the barrier of time and freed Lin Li from the turbulence. Frankly speaking, the High Priest was Lin Li's savior. Of course, that would not have changed Lin Li's determination to defeat him. After regaining his consciousness, he used all he knew about the divine level Magath on the monuments to suppress Power. Edmund and the rest could not believe their eyes. Did they just witness Lin Li defeat the High Priest? All of them stood rooted to the ground, dumbfounded. They dared not flinch for fear of waking up from this dream. Unlike them, Conorus and the 2 undead servants from the Tower of Dusk who were connected to Lin Li's soul naturally knew that it was reality. They bolted to Lin Li the moment they saw him making an extremely weak landing. They wanted to check on Lin Li and protect him from a possible sneak attack from the Gilded Kingdom. Flick, how did you do that? I knew you would have a way out, Conorus said excitedly as he started to pat Lin Li's shoulders profusely the very moment he reached the ladder. Being a close rival for the goblin Angelano, when it came to fearing death, Conorus would never want to part with his perfect body and die alongside Lin Li. Hence, no words could be used to describe his excitement when he saw Lin Li defeat Power. In reality, Conorus was not the only one who felt this way. No one but Lin Li knew how he succeeded in defeating a demigod. After all of them saw Lin Li being terribly helpless a minute ago. They could not believe how he reversed his fate within the next minute. It was just like a fairy tale. Just when Conorus wanted to continue patting Lin Li's shoulders, Norfler stopped him with his hands. Master needs a rest, he chided Conorus coldly. If it had been before, it would have been extremely easy for Conorus to bully Norfler, but now that Norfler had entered the sanctuary realm, Conorus really did not dare to trifle with him anymore. Yeah, I was just too excited, wasn't I? HMPH, wait till I enter the sanctuary realm. Conorus sulked as he withdrew his hands from Lin Li. At the same time, Edmund and Elder Zoomer walked over as well. Edmund had mixed feelings when he saw Lin Li standing behind his 2 protective undead servants. Never would he have thought that he would require the help from an outsider in their mission. Lin Li patted Norfler on his shoulders, and walked past his two servants. Although he seemed rather weak, he was still more alert and energetic than Edmund and Elder Zoomer, who had suffered great injuries. Saint Edmund, Elder Zoomer, do you not have an explanation for this? Asked Lin Li indifferently. Edmund had previously promised that they would not wake the ancient god of light from his sleep in their retrieval of the holy artifact. It was this promise that convinced Lin Li to bring his men on board this mission. But, although the god of light secretly played a part in the mishap, the slip-up of the Gilded Kingdom was definitely not to be looked past. Furthermore, Lin Li was not someone who would do favors for free. While it seemed like Lin Li was being polite when he asked for an explanation from Edmund, it was clear that he was asking for compensation from the Gilded Kingdom and Illuminati. Edmund was not frustrated by Lin Li at all. The former knew that he was in the wrong, and was clear that the holy artifact was still in Lin Li's hands. He had come all the way here for the holy artifact. He needed it to revive Saint Aquilo, the founder of the Illuminati. Now that Lin Li had acquired the key to the mission, Edmund would definitely not mind being scolded by Lin Li. President Flick, we would really like to apologize for this unexpected mishap caused by our slip-up. I would also like to represent the Illuminati and the Gilded Kingdom to thank you for how you have contributed to us, said Edmund with extreme sincerity. While his sincerity stemmed from the knowledge that Lin Li had their holy artifact, it was also due to his genuine admiration for Lin Li's great potential. Lin Li gradually regained his composure as he spoke. Saint Edmund, let's talk about something more practical. I have helped to resolve such a problem, and have acquired your holy artifact. Just like before, I want to read the highest scripture from Illuminati and other ancient research articles. I hope you do not use any reason to patronize me when the time comes, said Lin Li as he waved his hand. How would we do that? President Flick, since we have promised you the conditions, we would definitely fulfill them. I will also report to our Lord about the great favor you have done for us. I'm sure the Illuminati and Gilded Kingdom would have handsome rewards for you too, replied Edmund, who grew a little embarrassed. Before this, he even got onto good terms with High Priest Power when they plotted against Lin Li. He did not expect High Priest Power to create such a huge mess that they had to trouble Lin Li to help solve. Well, I'll trust you again, then. This is your holy artifact, you can have it back, replied Lin Li as he threw the holy artifact to Edmund without a care. Lin Li's move was too unexpected and quick for Edmund to react to retrieve the holy artifact that was thrown at him. If Elder Zoomer had not stepped in to catch it, the holy artifact would have smashed into Edmund's face. One would have known how invincible the Illuminati's holy artifact was when it helped to raise High Priest Power from the middle to the peak of the sanctuary realm. Hence, no one would believe that Lin Li would throw such a powerful holy artifact, as though it was a common object if they did not witness it themselves. Of course, Lin Li was not as selfless as he appeared to be. He had already studied the holy artifact carefully, and discovered that the holy artifact was not even comparable to the debris of the stars. Holy light. While it was an impressive holy artifact to the Illuminati, it was rather useless for someone like Lin Li, who had the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Lin Li was not a Scrooge who would accumulate all the good stuff for collection purposes. He believed that doing so would only undermine the value of those treasures. Since the holy artifact would be useless to Lin Li, it only made sense for him to use it in exchange for better things. Edmund only snapped back to reality when he saw the holy artifact landing in the hands of Elder Zoomer. His eyes radiated an inconcealable glow of excitement. This is the Eye of Light. We have finally found the Eye of Light. We finally have the hope of resurrecting Lord Aquilo, he said with trembling lips, after he turned to Elder Zoomer. Edmund's words erased Evrion's despair, and even the people from the Gilded Kingdom started cheering. Although it was High Priest Power who promised to lead the Gilded Kingdom to eternal glory, the Illuminati seemed a lot safer and more reliable to the people from the Gilded Kingdom. It was Lin Li's first time hearing the name of the artifact. However, its name did not matter to Lin Li. Alright, Saint Edmund, now the holy artifact has been recovered. Do you have any other tasks on hand? Asked Lin Li. Edmund suppressed his delight, and received the Eye of Light from Zoomer. Yes, we will be able to complete the resurrection ritual with the Eye of Light once we find Lord Aquilo's body, replied Edmund. Oh, you can continue with your tasks then. I'll go take a break, Lin Li said indifferently as he turned towards his camp for a much-needed rest. Now that the holy artifact had been found, it was as though nothing ever concerned him. While he seemed to be alive and kicking, the drainage of his mental strength was terrifying in the minute when he tried to understand the secrets within the Mageth. This was despite his massive amount of mental strength. If he had been a common man, he would have turned into a demented soul. After consuming the same amount of mental strength, Lin Li had managed to turn a minute into a dozen of days, to allow himself time to gain a little knowledge about the Mageth on the monuments. Yet, this amount of knowledge was sufficient to help Lin Li get rid of Power, a demigod. This was enough to prove that the Mageth was a formidable existence. And this was not the only benefit that Lin Li had gained from the interaction with the Mageth. While he had only managed to understand a small portion of the divine level Mageth, this bit of knowledge was enough to raise his status beyond a guru-level artisan. He was now akin to a demigod in his credentials as an inscriptionist. Although he had yet to become a divine, it was definite that he had surpassed the guru realm. Of course, it would be a bit of an exaggeration to say that he had become a demigod. Yet, this experience was like a lighthouse that directed Lin Li by giving him clarity on his progress towards becoming a divine smith. He knew that it would only be a matter of time for him to become one, and it was now definite that he had found his way in the vast ocean. Furthermore, since there was still a complete divine level Mageth on those 7 monuments, it meant that it was not a lighthouse, but a sea route that was secured by countless lighthouses. Lin Li would not need to explore or worry that he might be going on a detour, for he knew he could simply follow the route all the way to his destination. Therefore, after returning the holy artifact to Edmund, the first thing that Lin Li did was to send his men to duplicate the entire Mageth from those monuments. With the void spirit Mageth that he acquired previously, Lin Li's confidence of becoming a divine smith was quadrupled now that he had acquired 2 kinds of divine level Mageths. It was as though he had bought double insurance for himself to clinch that achievement. If that would not let him advance to a divine smith, Lin Li would certainly not forgive himself. Under the command of Lin Li, the mages from the team started their work around the 7 monuments. Each of the monuments was at least 100 meters tall, and the magic runes on it were like a sky of stars, while the magic nodes on it were as complicated as spiderwebs. Edmund, who had been part of the meeting to plan for the search of Aquilos's body, saw the people from the Tower of Dusk working on the monuments. He could not help but leave the discussion to Elder Zoomer and the others to join Lin Li. President Felix, it seemed like you have used the powers from these 7 monuments to defeat Power. I suppose you were very familiar with the Mageth on these monuments, asked Edmund. Saint Edmund, you might have misunderstood. I just happened to be interested in inscriptions, and thought that it would be nice to bring the blueprint of this Mageth back for a closer look. It would be an exaggeration to say that I am familiar with it, as I merely got to skim through it, replied Lin Li very frankly. Lin Li was not trying to be humble. The Mageth on the 7 monuments was a divine level Mageth. It was an extremely great achievement for him to even understand the surface of the Mageth, not to mention that he was an inscription guru. Even if he were an inscriptionist at the divine level, it would be impossible for him to fully understand an unfamiliar Mageth within a short while. Although Edmund had little understanding of inscriptions, he could guess how powerful this Mageth was from, how it could suppress the god of light, and it was definitely remarkable for Lin Li to use it to defeat a demigod despite only having a superficial understanding of the Mageth. However, this was not the only reason that motivated Edmund to approach Lin Li. After some hesitation, Edmund started, President Felix, I learned from our scripture that as long as there was someone who could master the Mageth from these 7 monuments, we would be able to speed up the resurrection of our Lord. So, I would like to ask if you, Saint Edmund, you really think very highly of me. This is a divine level Mageth. If I had been able to comprehend it, I would not have been in such dire straits facing Power. I'm afraid I do not have that power, and I have to reject your request, Lin Li interrupted Edmund, before the latter could finish his speech. Edmund was not troubled by Lin Li's rejection. Not now, President Felix. I know that it would be too much for you to handle it now. What I meant is, I hope you could help us resurrect Lord Aquila once you comprehend this Mageth, explained Edmund smilingly. Is Edmund booking an appointment with me? Thought Lin Li. He finally understood what Edmund was trying to do. Frankly speaking, he was not even certain how much time he would need to master the divine level Mageth. He might even take centuries, yet come to no conclusion. However, it would not hurt for Lin Li to make an empty promise in exchange for future benefits. This pact would certainly make the Illuminati more careful in their relationship. This would definitely be of considerable impact to himself and the Breezy Plains. Therefore, Lin Li did not continue to reject his request. Sure, I will return to help you resurrect your lord once I fully comprehend this Mageth, agreed Lin Li without further hesitation. I am so grateful for your promise, thanked Edmund profusely. The first thing he did when he heard Lin Li's agreement was to thank Lin Li, regardless of whether the task would succeed. He did not have the mental capacity to think about any other matter. Now that the high priest had been defeated, the god of light became more settled than before as well. Hence, the mages from the Tower of Dusk had a simple job as they concentrated on their work with the 7 monuments. The Mageth on the monument was very soon duplicated by the mages. At the same time, the people from the Gilded Kingdom had regained most of their energy. Of course, they were all waiting for the people from the Tower of Dusk to finish their work. Although Edmund and Elder Zoomer suffered heavy injuries, they were recovering very quickly as well. While the 2 sanctuary powerhouses had yet to return to their peak condition, they had regained enough energy to continue their journey at this time. After Edmund and Elder Zoomer confirmed the details with Lin Li, the two teams left the place that suppressed the god of light and advanced towards the expected location, where Lord Aquilos' body should be. This time, they did not encounter any attacks by magical beasts. Perhaps the latter were all intimidated by the aura of the demigod. Very quickly, the two teams reached the ruins that once seemed to have been a palace in the desert. When they saw the ruins, Edmund and Elder Zoomer sighed in relief. They recognized the ruins as the place where their founding lord, Aquilo, died. Edmund and Elder Zoomer had been feeling rather shameful in front of the people from the Tower of Dusk due to the trouble they had with High Priest Power. They would be even more embarrassed to think of accomplishing their mission if they could not find Lord Aquilos' body now. After ascertaining that there was no danger in the ruins, Edmund instructed his team to stay put. Then, he went to Lin Li to invite him into the ruins. By right, now that they had found the place, the task to resurrect Aquilo should fall back to the Illuminati. There was no reason why he would want to bring an outsider like Lin Li into the place. It was Lin Li's promise that motivated Edmund to do so. Edmund hoped that Lin Li could help to speed up Lord Aquilos' resurrection after he gained mastery of the Mageth. Hence, even though there was nothing for Lin Li to do right now, Edmund felt that it would only be respectful if he were to invite Lin Li into the ruins to witness Aquilos' resurrection. Lin Li would be lying if he were to say that he was not curious about the founding Lord Aquilo. Furthermore, according to Edmund, Aquilo was a man who had fought alongside the immortal king. Lin Li would not want to miss anything that might be related to the immortal king. Hence, he readily agreed to Edmund's invitation. Lin Li did not bring anyone from the Tower of Dusk into the ruins. He let Connorus and his two undead servants stand guard outside in case of any unexpected accidents. After all, Lin Li did not feel safe in this strange place after the trouble he had with the God of Light. After settling everything, Lin Li entered the ruins alongside Edmund and Zoomer. They walked through a tattered cloister and got to the main building. The main building was half collapsed and had huge chunks of broken stone pillars leaning everywhere. After they passed by some piles of rubble, the three people saw a limp figure that resembled a dry corpse sitting in the center. The figure had a head that hung low and a body that seemed to have completely lost its water content, just like a corpse that was dried up in a desert. Dry and wrinkly skin was tightly wrapped around the bones, and the black robe that it donned had a very distinct Dark Age fashion style. One would be able to tell that the black robe was a valuable and exorbitant treasure from the vigorous mana waves that it continued to emit even though a few thousand years had passed. In his bony right hand was a broken magic staff. The other end of the staff had rolled a short distance away from the body, and the gem that was etched on top had long shattered into smithereens. The same wrinkled left hand that was placed on his lap was showing a very weird gesture, as if a magic seal of a certain spell. Although they could not see the face of the dry corpse, Edmund and Zoomer were extremely certain that this corpse belonged to Aquilo. They rushed to the corpse the moment they saw it, and bowed deeply before the dry corpse reverently. "Almighty Lord, please forgive us for our incompetence, for we have only reached you now. You have been compromised for all these thousands of years," cried Edmund. Underlying his voice was a sense of guilt and indignation. Lin Li stood at the side quietly. He had little thoughts about Edmund and Zoomer's reaction to the corpse. As the souls of sanctuary powerhouses were immortal, Lin Li believed that they would be able to find Aquilo's soul, or at least his soul print in the dry corpse. After using half of the time to plead for forgiveness, Edmund and Zoomer finally stood up, took out the holy artifact, Eye of Light, and prepared to start the resurrection ritual for Aquilo. However, when Edmund retrieved the Eye of Light, the space in the ruins turned dark. It was as though the day had turned into night. The transition shocked Edmund and Zoomer. They were so fearful of potential dangers that they even brought out their magic staffs. Suddenly, a ray of light appeared before Aquilo's corpse. It slowly transformed into a blurry figure. Although his face was unrecognizable, the robe that it donned told the three men that he was the hologram of Aquilo, who was waiting for his descendants to bring him back to life. The sight of the hologram that Aquilo left behind helped Edmund and Zoomer realized that Aquilo had to have something important to tell his descendants. Their hands that were tightly clenching their staffs finally loosened up upon this thought. Furthermore, despite knowing that it was a hologram, both of them bowed before the figure very respectfully as though they were meeting the man himself. This piqued Lin Li's curiosity as well. He had been acting as the bystander. If he could hear information from the man directly, it would definitely be a more credible source than those ancient records. After a moment's wait, the mana wave from Aquilo's hologram gradually settled. The men could hear a sigh from the recording. Underlying the sigh was sadness and regret. It was as though it came from a loving elderly who saw their child acting in a problematic way. "You shouldn't be here." Edmund and Zoomer could not believe that these were the first words that they would hear from Aquilo. The Illuminati had spent a few thousand years planning to enter this place to resurrect Lord Aquilo. They certainly could not fathom why Aquilo's hologram would discourage them from coming. However, there was no way for Edmund and Zoomer to clarify any of their doubts. After all, It was a magic hologram that was speaking. What they could do was to remain patient and watch the hologram patiently in hopes that it would answer their doubts later. Edmund and Zoomer did not wait too long for their queries to be addressed. Since you have arrived, I presume that you would have some understanding of this place and have discovered the strangeness of it. However, please do not continue your exploration no matter what you have experienced. There is a terrible secret in this place that could bring a devastating catastrophe to the Illuminati and Gilded Kingdom. Aquilo's words immediately reminded the men of the shrine where they found the god of bravery. From that shrine, they knew that there was definitely much more to this place. If not, how would it attract the two divines and a freak like Immortal King? Lin Li started to suspect that the Aquilo's secret might be the reason why Garesco led Lin Li here, and he could tell from Aquilo's voice that Aquilo knew about this secret. This understanding brought out all his hopes as Lin Li eagerly waited for Aquilo to continue speaking. He couldn't wait for the secret to be revealed. Aquilo paused after speaking that line. It seemed like he was trying to cope with some difficult feelings as he created this recording. Then, he continued after a while, "You do not need to know what the secret is. Do not even try to look for it. This is a cursed sea where even the gods will be doomed. The secret is definitely not something mortals should be privy to. After watching this hologram, I hope that you can get out of this place immediately, forget everything that happened here, and never come here again," said Aquilo in a very stern tone. Lin Li nearly spat blood when he heard Aquilo. What the hell does he mean by saying that there is no need to know the secret? Isn't that what I am here for? Of course, Lin Li was very clear that there would be a great possibility for the people from the Illuminati to make their way here had Aquilo revealed anything about the secret. Lin Li thought that Aquilo had to be referring to the god of bravery when he mentioned that this was a place that would bring gods to their doom. Yet from the information he learned from the shrine, he understood that the fall of the god of bravery was caused by the god of light. It did not seem to be due to a curse. Why did Aquilo say that this place is cursed? But Aquilo did not stop here. It does not matter whether you are from the Illuminati or whether you know I am. I can share a clue with you if you are still curious about this place. Once, a powerful mage left 7 magic towers on the 7 islands in this region. As long as you can master the secrets within the 7 magic towers, you will be able to inherit the treasures that were left behind by that mage. The secret of this place is one of them, continued Aquilo. Lin Li was reminded of the island where they discovered the void spirit Mageth and the 7 magic towers created by Immortal King in the world created by Garesco. Through this, Lin Li was very confident that Immortal King was the powerful mage Aquilo was referring to. It was the location of the 7 islands built by Immortal King that gave Lin Li a clue where to find this place, Ice Island. At that time, he already had the thought that the existence of the 7 islands had to have a connection to Ice Island. Now, this guess was ascertained by Aquilo's recording. However, Lin Li did not expect the 7 islands to be so important that they were also related to Immortal King's legacy and the secret hidden in this place. However, what gave Lin Li a headache was the divine level Mageths established on the 7 magic towers. He did not have the confidence to understand the 7 magic towers in a short while. It was not something that could be fulfilled with time. If he was lucky, he would be able to master them with the help of a single realization. If not, a century might be insufficient for him to gain any enlightenment. As for Edmund and Zoomer, although they were also interested in the secret mentioned by Aquilo, and also hoped to acquire the inheritance of the powerful mage that suppressed the ancient god of light, they had good self-awareness that it would be impossible for them to master that divine level Mageth. Furthermore, they would also not want to go against Aquilos while out of reverence for him. The man in the hologram continued speaking while the trio had different thoughts regarding Aquilos' words. However, I do not think you would stand any chance. He said that his other self would be here in the future. Perhaps. The hologram disappeared before Aquilo could finish speaking due to the depletion of the mana that had been sustaining it. As the image dissipated, the space around the men returned from night to day. Perhaps what? Say it before you disappear, *Shoal, thought Lin Li frustratedly. Aquilos' last words made him recall that Edmund might have mentioned something along the same lines before as well. The hologram just had to end when Lin Li was eagerly anticipating to hear from someone who had interacted with the Immortal King himself to give more of his insights. What did he mean when he said that the Immortal King's other self would come here in the future? Lin Li felt a personal connection with the words that the Immortal King had left behind. He always felt that his transmigration to Anral was somehow related to the Immortal King. Lin Li was really devastated when he watched the hologram disappear just like that. He really hoped he could grab Aquilo and shake all the secrets out of him. Fortunately, He remembered Edmund and Zoomer were around. They would definitely not allow him to do anything that would offend Aquilos's body. And although Edmund and Zoomer were curious about the secret, they stayed loyal to their mission. They were not here to discover any secrets, but to resurrect Lord Aquilo with the holy artifact. The Illuminati had already wanted to resurrect Lord Aquilo a few thousand years ago. Everything would be secondary before that. After they saw that the surroundings had returned to normal, Edmund and Zoomer stood up and started preparing for the resurrection ritual. This ritual was not complicated. They did not need to prepare any altar like how they did to obtain the holy artifact. They only set up an alchemy array around Aquilos's body. After setting up the alchemy array, Edmund stood in position and took out the Eye of Light. While he started to recite a long and obscure spell, a light was produced by the holy artifact again. This time, the light that it produced was gentler than the time it was in High Priest Power's hands. While the light was strong, it was not blinding. As the light shone, the Eye of Light hovered out of Edmund's hand, flew towards Aquilo slowly, and stopped above his chest. Then, it started to turn, and directed rays of light onto the body. Under the influence of the Eye of Light, Aquilo's shriveled body was like a piece of dried earth that came into contact with the rain. It was obvious that the skin that was once like a wilted tree trunk started to radiate with a little vitality. However, the change was extremely slow. No one knew how long it would take for them to resurrect Aquilo. Lin Li did not really put it to heart when he first agreed to Edmund's request that he would help the Illuminati speed up Aquilos's resurrection, after he mastered the Magath that was on the 7 monuments. It was not because Lin Li thought lowly of the promise, but because he was not sure when he would be able to master the Magath. After all, it was a divine-level Magath, and Lin Li was a busy man. It would not make sense for him to devote all his time and energy to the study. However, the suspense that Aquilos's hologram created convinced Lin Li that he had to start considering how much energy to devote to the study of the Magath. He knew that the earlier he could master the Magath and resurrect Aquilo, the earlier he would be able to hear him speak about the immortal king. Of course, there was also the possibility that Lady Luck would give Lin Li the clarity to everything before he could master the Magath. But Lin Li was never someone who would surrender himself to fortune. He always believed that efforts were more dependable than luck. Edmund ended the resurrection ritual while Lin Li's mind was raging with all the different possibilities. He limped towards Lin Li with the help of Elder Zoomer. President Flick, we have completed our task here for the time being. I hope you will remember to help us speed up Lord Aquilos's resurrection after you master the Magath on the monuments, said Edmund. If it were before, Lin Li would definitely not treat this promise as his priority. He was planning to think about helping the Illuminati only when he was completely free from other matters. But he now really hoped to let Aquilo speak even without Edmund's request. It seemed like he had already put this matter to heart. However, Lin Li did not show that sense of eagerness to anyone. Rest assured, since I have given you my promise, I will definitely help you when I have the ability, he replied calmly as he gave Edmund a slight nod. Edmund felt a little relieved hearing Lin Li's affirmation. However, he was clear that it would depend on the Illuminatus relationship with the Tower of Dusk as well. If the two forces were to enter a conflict and officially become enemies with one another, this promise would definitely not take effect. Of course, Edmund had the confidence that he could convince the higher-ups to change their attitude towards the Tower of Dusk. After all, war would not be the best option for anyone. The 3 men gazed at Aquilo as he was recovering. With different thoughts in mind, they left the ruins. Edmund had completed his mission, and Lin Li had no intention for further exploration. Although they had seen the monuments that suppressed the ancient god of light and found Aquilo, they knew that this was only the tip of an iceberg. Despite his abilities, Lin Li did not have the confidence to continue with deeper exploration so recklessly. After all, this was a place that could bring gods to their fall. Furthermore, Lin Li had reaped considerably great rewards this time round. What he needed to do was to process all the rewards and convert them into his own ability. For example, if he could understand and master the powers of the twin serpents of light and darkness, he would definitely become the most powerful man in the sanctuary realm, without being able to create his own divine world. The divine-level Magath that he acquired had also helped him gain clarity of the road to becoming a divine smith. He could even use it to enter the divine realm. Since both of the teams did not have plans to continue their exploration, their respective leaders started to lead them back on the path that they came from after they reconsolidated their resources. This time, their journey back outside the gold-shining palace was faster. It only took them half a day. However, the two teams faced a problem when they reached the bottom of the great dark entrance of the underworld. They took nearly a day to descend from the top when they first came here, and the weaker ones were nearly drained of all their mana. It would certainly be more laborious for them to fly out of this place. Although flying out of the place would require more mana for the people from the Tower of Dusk, they had the magical crystals on their magic wings that would help them to take care of that. Not to mention if one were a legendary mage or not, a magic shooter would have been able to fly out of this place very easily with the magic wings. But things were different for the people from the Gilded Kingdom. They had to use their own mana to fly. The weaker ones would definitely fall back down after depleting their mana. Hence, the people from the Gilded Kingdom became very vexed as they calculated the chances of them flying out alive. Moreover, the weaker ones had had the help from their 3 sanctuary powerhouses when they had descended. Now that High Priest Power was out of the team, and Edmund and Zoomer were injured, they did not have the ability to take care of them now. Edmund naturally thought of this problem as well. He turned to look at the people from the Tower of Dusk, and saw their mages wearing the magic wings on their backs. After some hesitation, he got Zoomer to accompany him to find Lin Li. Saint Edmund, I see that you are not preparing for your departure. Do you have anything else to do here? Asked Lin Li curiously as he supervised his men preparing for their departure, but saw Edmund and Zoomer approach him. Replied Edmund a little embarrassedly. It is like this, President Flick. We were ill prepared when we came here. We did not expect that we would consume such a great amount of energy when we entered this place, and it would be even harder for us to leave. I see that your men have the help of those magic wings, and I was wondering if you have spare ones to lend some of them to us. He asked Lin Li, knowing that he would be owing him another favor. Oh, I see, responded Lin Li. It was only then that Lin Li realized that the people from the Gilded Kingdom had the ability to enter, but not to leave this place. Yet, as his main objective of having the magic wings was also to test their functionality, Lin Li only brought enough magic wings for each of his men. While Lin Li had some spare ones to prepare for unexpected glitches, he did not have enough to equip the large team from the Gilded Kingdom. Edmund and Zoomer knew of this possibility too. Who would bring so many pairs of spare magic wings to an adventure mission? They were here to explore, not set up a business. Furthermore, while the magic wings looked simple, they were definitely made with very important alchemy techniques. If Edmund were Lin Li, he would not be willing to lend them to other people so easily. The reason why he came to ask Lin Li was because that was his last resort. If not, they would have to continue to stay here till they recovered their energy to bring their men out in batches. Therefore, Lin Li's difficult expression convinced Edmund to take back his request. President Flick, it is alright if that is not a good idea for you. We will think of other ways, said Edmund. However, just when Edmund and Zoomer were preparing to leave disappointed, Lin Li called out to them. Saint Edmund, Elder Zoomer, while I do not have enough of these magic wings, I've got something to lend you if you're just trying to get out of here safely, said Lin Li. By the time Edmund and Zoomer turned back, Lin Li had already brought out a behemoth airship from his ring of endless storms. Such airships were not unique to the world that Lin Li came from. They were also an important mode of transportation during the time when the goblins were establishing an alchemy civilization. However, with the demise of the goblins, many products of their alchemical civilization were lost as well, and since the airship could easily turn its users into the target of potential enemies due to its slow, flying speed, no one cared to develop it anymore. As a result, it naturally lost the hopes of flying in the sky. This, gasped Edmund and Zoomer. They could not believe their eyes when they saw Lin Li let out such an enormous airship. The technical aspects of the airship aside, Lin Li's ability to carry such a gigantic item with him so casually meant that the space in his ring had to be massive. It was definitely more than a ring in the space artifact. While the people from the Tower of Dusk opened their magic wings and swooped towards the black hole in the sky, the people from the Gilded Kingdom started to operate Lin Li's airship, and they inched upwards very slowly. Although its speed was incredibly slow, it was easy, safe, and reliable in its operation. Lin Li brought his men out of the underworld very quickly, and they flew directly towards the edge of Ice Island, where they anchored the star. Lin Li did not care to wait for his airship, as he knew that it would take the people from the Gilded Kingdom 3 to 5 more days to get out of that place. Since it was not a remarkable technology, Lin Li did not mind leaving it with them, for the time being.
Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.